All right, we just got the live stream notification.
Excellent, excellent. So want to welcome everyone to the OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board Committee for Water and Climate. And why don't we start with, and I'll just say, my name is Jay McLeod-Skinner. I'm a co-chair along with Bruce Buckmaster. Why don't we start off by doing introductions, and then I'll just ask people to go around the screen for those who are popping up in the order there on the screen. So Stephanie, why don't we start with you?
All right, morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director at OWEB.
Gary.
Morning, everyone. Gary Marshall, Member at Large, OWEB Board.
Thanks. Eric Hartstein.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator at OWEB.
Thank you. Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, OWEB Board Member, Public at Large.
Thank you. Dan.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Brown, and I am EPA ex officio member of the board.
Thank you. Jesse.
Good morning, everybody. Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks. Bruce.
And I'm Bruce Buckmaster from Astoria, a board member at large.
Thank you. Eric Williams.
Good morning, everybody. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Thank you. Scott.
Good morning, everyone. I am Scott Altenhoff. I am the Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager with Oregon Department of Forestry.
Wonderful. Meg.
Good morning. My name is Meg Reeves. I'm the Oregon Water Resources Commission representative to OWEB.
Thank you. And Lisa.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Sharplow Hansen, Executive Director with OWEB.
Thanks so much. And Nicole's in the background helping to make it all work. So thank you for being a part of it. My name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner. As I mentioned, I'm a co-chair. I serve as an OWEB board member at large and based in Central Oregon. So just as a reminder to everyone, we're live streaming over YouTube. I mentioned the welcome to the meeting. I didn't mention, just for the record, this is the June 14th, 2023 meeting. And let me first just run through the agenda really quickly so that folks know what we're going to be talking about today. Also want to say, for those who are interested in providing public comment, we'll have that section later on in the meeting. And members of the public are welcome to either join us and give verbal public comment, or also submit written comments. And so when we get to that point in the agenda, we'll welcome those additions. But the first part of the agenda is to follow up our conversation on voluntary carbon markets. We had a great discussion last time, so we wanted to finish that and talk through some of the questions that have come up. We're going to get a legislative update, interesting session, so we'll hear more about that. Update on the climate resolution rulemaking process. Talk a little bit about the intersectionality between our committees, including the Grants Committee and the DEI Committee. And public comment, and then for the good of the order and potential items for our next meeting. So from the committee members, anything you'd like to add to the agenda at this point? Are we good for that conversation? Does it sound good? Excellent. So let's get right into a continuation of our conversation on voluntary carbon markets. Bruce Buckmaster did a great job had a great presentation last time, a great job of starting what was a very robust conversation. Because of the time restrictions, we had to move on. And so we placed it on this agenda to finish up some of those conversations. There were also some great questions that came from that. But Bruce, why don't I turn over to you at this point, and if you could lead that conversation, please.
Thanks, Jamie. We took notes of it was a robust discussion, and Jesse looked at them. It looks like we have 5 topics to follow up on, but be in respect for Eric Williams' time. One of the most important that kept coming up was the acquisition grant types, the issue of carbon sequestration, carbon credits, and it's how we deal with those, how we have dealt with them with the North Coast Land Conservancy, and what are our constraints or opportunities moving forward. Eric?
Chair Buckmaster. Appreciate the time this morning. Happy to talk about the one example that we have where we dove into this question and I think came to a pretty good resolution on it. So as background, in our land acquisition grant program, OWEB offers an open solicitation for land acquisition grants each year. And when the board funds a land acquisition project, in the case of a fee simple acquisition, land trusts come to us with a grant application. If the board awards funds, the funds go towards the closing of the project. The land trust owns the conservation property and OWEB owns a conservation easement on the property. Now, we also fund conservation easement projects, but let's set that aside for now because I think the case that we're talking about is mostly fee simple acquisition projects. And so in the case of the North Coast Land Conservancy's Rainforest Reserve project, this one I would describe as a generational opportunity for protection of a large block of land on the North Coast for conservation values. The overall Rainforest Reserve is over 4,000 acres, I believe. The piece that OWEB invested in is a 1,600 acre piece in the southeast corner of the Rainforest Reserve. The land trust that owns the property came to us, North Coast Land Conservancy, with a request regarding sales of carbon credits. In each of our conservation easements that we hold, we do have provisions in there that discuss things like sale of carbon credits and basically say that OWEB has to approve any such sale. And so North Coast Land Conservancy came to us with a request to sell carbon credits, mainly for carbon sequestration provided by the forests on the property. The way that we look at this, and I'm going to set aside the mitigation policy that we currently have, and we know that that needs work because I don't really think the issue here relates mainly to the mitigation policy. It relates more to what did we use public funds for, and then what can happen after we've invested those public funds in the easement. And so in the case of the North Coast Land Conservancy, one of the things that the easement accomplishes, once our easement is in place, it legally restricts the kinds of harvest you can do on the forest and the property. And so it would prohibit, for example, industrial harvest on the property. A lot of the carbon sequestration approaches in the private market look at the sequestration value essentially of the growth of the trees on the property. And they look at the difference in a change in a harvest pattern to allow for that forest growth. And then the additionality or the additional sequestration provided by that forest growth can be compensated through the carbon credit market. And in what we discussed with North Coast Land Conservancy is that because our easement had already paid for with public funds a change in the harvest strategy, we couldn't approve a sale of carbon credits that looks at the difference in industrial harvest and a longer term late successional model forest harvest plan, and then in turn sell that because they would essentially be selling something that public funds already paid for. And so where we landed on that is that OWEB, of course, requires match on our projects. And in this case, the North Coast Land Conservancy provided more than our minimum 25% match. It was around a 50-50 match, not quite exactly, but let's call it 50-50. And so where we came to in our agreement with North Coast is that we could approve a sale of carbon credits for up to 50% of the available credits on the property, since the other 50% of the funds were brought in by North Coast Land Conservancy. Those were not OWEB's public funds. And so that was the arrangement we came to. It's the first time that we've dealt with this scenario. And we wanted to make sure that we were deliberate about it, consulting with our attorneys and so forth through the process. And we feel pretty comfortable with the end result. And I think North Coast was happy with the result too. I hope they are. However, I have not heard recently whether or not that carbon credit sale has progressed. So let me stop there and see if anyone has any questions.
Anyone?
Bruce,
Thanks.
actually,
Okay, Dan. Dan Brown.
Thanks for seeing my real hand versus my video hand. And just completely out of curiosity, Eric, and if you don't know the answer off the top of your head, that's fine. I'm just kind of curious, like, what does that look like? Like, how long, like, would they even be able to sell enough credits to get even close to half of the price tag? Just out of curiosity.
Well, so let's separate the issue of the price tag of the property and the sale of carbon credits. So what they can do is, if the entity that they're working with says that for that 1,600 acre block of forest, we will buy 100 credits from you at whatever the market rate is. What we're saying is North Coast Land Conservancy can sell 50 of those credits at whatever the market rate is.
Meg.
Thanks, Bruce. So one of the things that it's not clear to me, I guess, and maybe you can help with this, Eric. Somebody else is going to, whoever kind of purchases the credits, brokers them. I'm not even sure how this market works, but so they will make an additionality determination, right? Whether these are real carbon offsets, kind of like wet water in the water world. And in the case you described, we allowed the trust to go forward with the portion of the acquisition that had been funded by private money, but not state money. And I guess I'm not really clear on what the concern is about the state money, if it's not the state's call whether these are viable credits or not. Do you see what I'm asking?
I do. And I agree. It's not our place to determine whether the credits are viable. And you're absolutely correct. The entities that are in this business do have their own requirements. And there was a key one in this case that the entity willing to purchase carbon credits had in their program structure. And that is that they are willing to basically pretend that any easements placed on a property looking back a year, they're willing to pretend that they don't exist. Now that's how they set up their program, and that's, their prerogative. But what we felt is that, well, it's our easement that was placed on the property within the last year. We're not willing to ignore that it exists because public funds purchased that easement. And so what the carbon market is paying for is that additionality. And I can't speak for them as to whether or not they think it's legitimate if there's already an easement on the property that changes timber harvest practices. That's not up to us to really meddle with. That's their concern if they want to get into that. And there have been some news stories about this, kind of questioning the validity of some of these projects where an entity comes in, a corporation wants to offset credits, they provide the entity a bunch of money, they provide the land trust entity with the purchase of these credits, but there's a lot of questions raised as to whether they're legitimate. And so it's not our role to decide how the carbon market players should look at these things, but we've got to look at protecting our public investment. And just didn't feel it would be responsible to essentially allow a sale of something we've already paid for, which is a change in harvest practices, essentially, among other things that are requirements of our easement. And that it would, I don't think, pass the straight face test in terms of stewardship of public funds.
One follow-up.
Sure.
Right. So I understand what you're saying. That makes sense to me. I'm thinking about if whether if this is a matter of sequence. I don't know whether land trusts in Oregon that come to or others in Oregon that come to OWEB for acquisition funds are interested in these markets. But But if they were, and it becomes kind of part of the means of funding maintenance, ongoing system stuff, it would, I'm trying to think of given that logic, is it a matter of sequencing? Like deciding when you come in, we want to do if you're a trust, we want to do this, but we only want to do it if we can get credit for what we're doing. And, I don't know how you get around that kind of additionality issue that you just described. And so, I don't know whether it's an issue for us because I don't know whether we have land trusts that are, well, I know we have one that wants to do this because we haven't experience with it, but I'd be interested in, well, that's what we're talking about, is whether there's a way to make this tool more available to land trusts that come to us for funding.
Yeah, and I think part of that is if, let's say, a land trust worked with some entity to sell carbon credits on a property before coming to OWEB, if there are deed restrictions placed on the property to support those carbon credits, that would be factored into the appraised value of the property or the easement that we would buy. And so I think we can factor it in that way. The other thing I would say is that I think there perhaps might be different opportunities in different habitat types. With forest habitat, it's pretty straightforward in terms of, how we're deriving value in an easement. If you don't allow continued industrial harvest, it reduces the easement on it, reduces the value of the property. In places like grassland habitat, our easement isn't paying for a change in strategy. There might be some need to, do some restoration around invasive weeds or things like that, but we're not paying for the thing that creates the sequestration value over the long term, which is simply grassland, just, by its sheer existence is a carbon sink. And, we have not paid for anything that the carbon credit would be paying for in that scenario. So I think there may be differences based on habitat type.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie?
Yeah, two things. One, first a comment, and then a follow-up question is kind of tied into Meg's question. And the comment's really for members of the public. So at last meeting I mentioned, we had a great conversation. There's also a voluntary carbon markets presentation on the OWEB website that Bruce provided. So if you're wanted to see that, it's at the oregon.gov/OWEB, and you can find this meeting and it's got those materials. So thanks staff for putting that on there. But those who want to see more in-depth discussion or background on this conversation. And then to the question, I was going to ask more about process in general. It sounds like, and I appreciated, Eric, you talking about the real care and deliberation that went into thinking about how to do it, because we're always thinking about then we'll be expected to do it similarly. So that thought process was really valuable. So my initial question was going to be just that, are we essentially established, or are we in the process of establishing a new process for how we do this? Or, what that looks like. And then just to your comment to Meg's question on the grassland value, I'm thinking of there may be value in habitat, like especially if there's sage grouse present, or there may be overlaps there. But it's more just that general process question. Where are we at then in terms of incorporating this this value added in terms of how we're looking at our projects?
Gary.
Would you like me to respond first?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Please, of course.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that is on our list of things to look at as we look at our mitigation policy. And, I think we do need to look at it in that context so that we're covering a lot of different bases of different types of things that might come up. But I think that's the proper venue for it. We don't have a timeline yet on when we're going to do that, but we know it's something that needs some attention.
Thanks, Eric. Now, Gary.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Gary Marsh for the record. Eric, I just want to say that I just appreciate you guys going through the rigor of working on this and coming up with, the reasons you did that. I mean, as speaking personally as a board member, I appreciate you taking care of the OWEB organization and the board, because I think this could get really dicey with mixing public money and land acquisitions and then selling stuff on a private market to do things. I think that we're too young in this carbon credit market to really be putting funds out there that are, questionable, and particularly when it comes to land acquisitions and setting up the possibility of, organizations being created that just do that. So I don't know where this could go, but anyway, I appreciate you taking care of me as a board member and the rest of the organization. Thanks.
Stephanie.
Bruce, I think one of the things you talked about in your presentation last time was the importance of permanence when we're talking about voluntary carbon markets. And so that makes me think of the risk of potentially using carbon credits as match or looking at it as a source of income for stewardship for a property, just because if there is a catastrophic event and a reversal of the sequestration, what would be the implications to the organization that received the credit? So I guess, would we consider that if that were proposed as a source of funding for a project, would we consider that in the evaluation of the grant application, or kind of where would you see that coming into play?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. One is that most of these entities that are in the carbon market have provisions for what if something happens, catastrophic wildfire, whatever the cause might be, that alters the sequestration value. And so if we're looking at a property that has some restrictions in place because they participated in the market, I think we would look at what those provisions are, make sure that they would line up with provisions that we would require in our easement to make sure that we're protecting the conservation values on the property. But from the documents that I saw from North Coast Land Conservancy's partner, they did have quite a bit in their agreement between the carbon market entity and the land trust on what happens in that situation. I think from our perspective, if we did invest in an easement on a property that had previously sold carbon credits and had those provisions in it, our interest would be, we just simply wouldn't allow anything that would be incompatible with the purpose of our easement. And so that's how we would be looking at whatever those provisions are, to make sure that they don't allow them to do something that would violate our easement. So it could be a little tricky in terms of, diving into all of those details. We have not faced that situation yet, but it's something we'll have to consider pretty carefully.
Thanks, Eric. Since the last meeting, I did some more looking up some of these issues of additionality, and I'd like to share. First, the funding, OWEB funding, is one step removed from the issue of carbon credit, voluntary carbon market, and additionality. It gives rise to all the concerns that have been voiced so far regarding whether or not or how we would fund any of these projects. But the additionality thing is really a hot potato in the current voluntary carbon market. The Nature Conservancy and the American Forest Foundation said that intention doesn't always equal behavior. So the whole issue of intent is we intend not to cut, or that survey also showed that 86% of the forest owners want their lands to stay wooded, and that most landowners run into a roadblock usually being able to fulfill the goal of property remaining wooded because of costs of management, technical management expertise. Family forests own 39% of the American forest, 290 million acres of forest land, and about 2/3 of those family forest owners have household incomes of less than $100,000. So that tells you why this can be very important for some of the smaller forest owners. There's also talk about new dynamic projected methodology for creating baseline emissions being used. There's the issue of more integrity, carbon credits having a high integrity label. There's a new integrity council for voluntary carbon markets, which should hopefully will remove some of the questions that Eric brought up that we've seen in the press and that are being asked. There's been a lot of work done at the Climate Trust in Portland. They say that basing additionality on historic forest management would all but preclude any conservation-minded landowners and non-government organizations from participating in carbon markets. Only owners who have been maximizing returns from timber harvesting would be eligible. And this is the one that really concerned me. So if you've been clear cutting and all of a sudden you say, okay, we won't do it, then you can get a voluntary carbon market. If you've been taking care of your forest and that has been your policy, then unfortunately you're not eligible. Past behavior does not guarantee the future. Improved forest management projects. That came up earlier in the discussion. Most of these are looking at 40 to 100-year contracts to legally protect the carbon stores. Conservation organizations are utilizing revenue from the sale of offsets to acquire and secure additional lands that can also be managed as long-term carbon sinks. Carbon offset projects have become key conservation finance strategy, leading to acquisition and conservation of thousands of forested acres whose future was in question. So on the negative side, here's something on the positive side. I guess it all serves to say that there are so many questions that are still out there on voluntary carbon markets and how they're being used. Then when we come back to looking at how does that impact OWEB, that's the question I think that becomes that is called. It's on the table, and I'm curious what others might have to say about that. Staff or Eric.
Thanks, Bruce. I think what I would say about that is these are all options for the forest landowner, right? There's an option to enter into the carbon market for a 40 to 100-year agreement. There's an option to sell a conservation easement on their property working with a land trust. Those two may or may not be able to be combined. The example we gave shows that there is a way to combine them. There may not be a way to get a full-on appraised value OWEB conservation easement and get the dollars from that and get the full-on dollars from a 40 to 100-year carbon credit sale. I think that's okay. I don't think that's a problem. I think we need to work through the situations that come to us as well as on the policy that we described earlier to help people understand, how we approach them. But I don't really see that as an either or situation.
Thanks, Eric. Well, I realize that the voluntary carbon market is a type of payment for ecosystem services. And in fact, almost all of our grants are also payments for ecosystem services. So in one aspect, what the voluntary carbon market is doing on funding to incentivize behaviors that are positive, that provide ecosystem services. It's very similar to what we do. Where the nexus is and where there may be a joining or some sort of nexus between us and a voluntary carbon market, I think is a question that we are still grappling with. Gary asked questions at the last meeting on urban inclusion. You talked about aggregation, parcel size eligibility. I looked at that, Gary. Henley Forest Carbon Program is open to landowners with 30 or more acres of land. So it gets that small. You also ask about tax implications. And I have no idea what those are. So we had questions that Jesse sent out about the president of North Coast Land Conservancy, OWEB allowing use of voluntary carbon payments or carbon credits as matching funds. Should we have a policy? Should we establish an arm's length? Is there any question about participation before, during, or even after we make an OWEB grant? There is a concern about the potential of greenwashing, and that's been one of the criticisms. Certainly, TNC got accused of that on selling credits for a piece of property that, for all practical purposes, is designed to never be cut. So, and there is also the appearance of rewarding participants at the expense of those who are already practicing good soil health and sequestration projects. So you're already doing it. Sorry, you can't participate. You haven't been doing it, we'll give you money to do it. There seems to be an inequity, a sense of fairness question that I think affects all of us. Questions, comments?
Bruce, can I just ask Jesse, or Stephanie or staff if there's follow-ups? I know before, Jesse, you had some thoughts. I think you may have also had for the questions, but just want to also prompt that.
Well, I'll let Lisa and Stephanie, since they both have their hands up, jump right in.
Oh, I actually had a suggestion that I'll hold off on. So go ahead and respond, Jesse or Lisa, if you want to comment first.
I'll let Jesse respond. I had more of a comment, just, to think about in the realm that we're in and discussing.
Well, and I don't know that I have any specific, I think these are all fantastic questions, and I think they're going to be really challenging for this committee to think through and talk about. So I was, looking forward to seeing what the thoughts of the board and committee members are on it.
Yeah, I'll go to the board members first. Dan?
I think Meg had her hand up before me.
Okay, Meg.
Thank you. One of the things that on the one hand, you could think about this as, I guess what I keep coming back to is the fact that whatever we do with this, somebody will use those credits to do something that needs carbon credits. In other words, to take actions that they wouldn't be otherwise able to do without use of these credits, which to me is maybe the best reason for exercising great care in dealing with the additionality question, which I think is really vexing for all of the reasons that are listed on this discussion sheet. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's I sometimes I found myself thinking of it in the abstract. I went back, and I wasn't at the last meeting, but I went back yesterday and listened to your conversation, which was a great conversation. But you could think about it in the abstract and think kind of, where is the harm maybe it increases the possibility, the activity that we're trying to incentivize. But the other side of this is that it also incentivizes kind of development that it isn't our job, at least, to incentivize, whether it's good or bad. It's not, so anyway, just something to think about.
Thanks, Meg. Dan?
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have anything intelligent to say, which is par for the course. But I mean, it's so complicated. And fortunately, there's some really smart people, discussing this. And Bruce, thank you so much for enlightening us to, some of that kind of background and intel work. So I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I just throw it out there. It's like the sort of incentive on the incentive for ecosystem services, right? We have phenomenal grant programs, OWEB does, and as do many other entities, just consistently trying to put protections on the land through incentives, right? And so in the ag community, trying to, incentivize riparian buffers. And those riparian buffers provide these ecosystem services. So in the context of that broader sort of, how do we incentivize more of that beneficial change for ecosystem services in general? It would be a question that we might want to think about is, would carbon credits help nudge somebody, additionality in another way? We have a lot of incentives trying to nudge people. Would carbon credits be an additional nudge to get them to act? I mean, I'm way out of my league here, but I think of people who are like trying to sort of use their land for beneficial purposes. And it's sometimes it's not just about money. It's about like, I love this land and I want to produce stuff on this land. And, maybe in addition to producing food, I feel good about producing carbon credits. I don't know how to get in that headspace, but the big picture question that I'm throwing out there is, would it be another incentive to get the kind of ecosystem services we would like? And then the other point that I just wanted to throw out there is, I assume in line with the questions and the one in particular about the state as a whole. And so, the state has climate goals and, broadly the state of Oregon, I don't know anything about them, but I know they exist. And maybe to meet state climate goals, the state would like to consider the fact that OWEB is purchasing these conservation easements, and that is could potentially help the state meet the goal. And so that's just another kind of bigger picture, like,
Thanks, Dan. Looks like you froze up. Lisa, Stephanie, if you don't mind, let me get around to the board members and then our committee members and come back to you. Gary?
Thanks, Bruce. So as everybody's talking about this, I was having some thoughts. I just really love this idea of the managers of our lands doing things that is going to improve and sequester more carbon. I mean, I just really like that. I had a meeting with a business that was that was one of these organizations, fairly new, that was offering this a carbon credit thing. And our minimum lot size over here, you might say, you don't want to touch anything under 1,000 acres. And I was prepared to offer, many times that. But when we got into this discussion, it's so complicated, and the potential for it's additionality on land that's already, maybe in pretty good shape for, for what it could potentially be is, it's pretty hard to measure. And that's what these businesses want to do, is have something that they can, that's going to multiply quickly, I guess, as far as this carbon sequestration. So, but I mean, I guess that's my own, really my own comment, is that I think that we want to, I really like the idea of incentivizing people, whether they're doing a good job now or not, because there's a lot more to learn about this, and there's a lot better ways to manage land that will provide that additionality, no matter what shape they're in right now, And so, Bruce, it's always, I mean, it just is those people that are already consciously and conscientiously doing things. They just can't get in on these kind of programs because they don't have maybe as much change to offer as those that are doing it, in a way that, as you pointed out there. So anyway, that's all I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks.
Bruce, you've got your mute on. I'm sure you're saying something incredibly eloquent, but I'll just.
Thanks, Jamie. I was just going to ask Lindsay if she would like to add anything before I went to Stephanie and Lisa.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bruce. I don't think I know or understand the issue enough to make a recommendation or weigh in, other than all good things to digest. And something that I'm really struggling with is that inequity that we sort of have been talking around. And so, folks that are already doing the right thing on the land aren't necessarily eligible or aren't incentivized to continue doing that, where maybe other land practices that should be modified or are desired to be modified are the ones who might come out winning in terms of, financially on this. That's something that's really hard for me to kind of grapple with.
Thanks, Lindsay. Lisa?
Thanks. So just a couple of things that have come to mind for me around this. One, I liked when it was framed as ecosystem services, paying for ecosystem services. We're going to have to deal with that in another place as well. And that's through the Oregon Ag Heritage Program, where we'll pay for practices. Do you pay people for practices that they're already doing? Or is it only people who are adopting new practices that are something else? Around certification programs from my previous life, we grappled with this a lot. And there is an equity issue out there in terms of those people that have been doing it a certain way that fits the services that you want versus those that don't. So something to think about there. The other thing that always crosses my mind when we get into these conversations is we're part of a larger natural resources enterprise in state government. And so what are other entities, agencies doing around this? There are other agencies that purchase, hold easements, et cetera. And so thinking about that, because I know when we were trying to work through the North Coast Land Conservancy project and the issues, we were really conscious about having some of those conversations with our sister agencies at the cabinet level, because of the potential precedent setting that's out there with it. And then the other piece that I overlaid, just thinking about it enterprise-wide, is the Global Warming Commission. And, how does this conversation and work intersect with some of the work that they're doing as they think about meeting goals and helping us move forward? So those are just, I don't have any answers, but things that I think about for consistency in state government and equity.
Thanks, Lisa. Stephanie.
Regarding the additionality and the challenge of rewarding those early adopters, I wanted to mention that's also something that came up in the Farm Bill forums that Lisa and I participated in, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But there used to be a program, and I think it still exists, called the Conservation Stewardship Program, I think was the acronym, and that was the whole intent of the program. It was reward the best and motivate the rest was the program's initial slogan. And I think in terms of getting funding at the national level, it's been challenging. I think there have been policy debates in Congress about funding it. And I think it's a shame because we do have so many early adopters here in Oregon that, that could benefit from that program. I was also going to mention, Eric Williams was referring to the mitigation policy. And I think there are a lot of parallels between what we're talking about today and the mitigation policy, and that we don't want to pay for kind of the same rock as someone else is already paying for or requiring. And so that is something, as Eric Williams mentioned, that has been on our radar to update over the last couple of years. And we've just had some other priorities take precedence over an update of that policy, but that could be a possible vehicle to explore some of these issues.
Thank you, Stephanie. Bruce, and if I can just jump back in, because I'm trying to keep us on track for the entire meeting, but because it's been such a great conversation, once again, it's absorbed a lot of time, but very much a great value added. So just in wrapping up, unless someone feels very strongly about some last comments to this item, let's just talk real briefly about next steps and where we go from here. Bruce, I don't know if you have thoughts. I thought Lisa queued that up very well, because it seems like one of those next steps conversation is how do we continue the conversation with enterprise-wide, and that may be something that, as I know, they're on a staff level, on a director level, those conversations are happening. But this body and the board as a whole may be interested in saying, hey, these are things we really have as priorities and would like you to talk about at that in that context, because I really think that is that next step. I think that point's very well taken. So, Bruce, do you have any wrap-up comments on this?
Yeah, thanks. And we'll wrap up. And I think am I right with the show of nods that we want to continue these conversations at the committee level? Okay. Then what I would ask staff, Jesse, is would it be possible for you to take a quick look around the state enterprise and see what else is being done on relationship with the voluntary carbon market, and maybe expand that out? I think Corey was talking about it. So there are other funding mechanisms at the federal level that have to be addressing the same issues that we're looking at right now. And maybe at the next meeting as a topic, we can have a report on how other funding agencies particularly are looking at their relationship with the voluntary carbon market. And if everybody agrees with that, then I think we're done with this item.
Bruce, I'll just add that the Oregon Global Warming Commission Natural and Working Lands group has convened an advisory committee to look at activity-based metrics around carbon sequestration and storage. And the agencies are now we're getting pulled into some of the discussions that have been happening within that advisory committee and some of the technical working groups. So over the course of the summer, we'll get a little bit more insight into what some of the policies and things that the Global Warming Commission has been working on and maybe is proposing for agencies. So we'll bring that to share as I get some more insight into that effort at the next committee meeting.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jesse. And then also, if there are meetings coming up with other boards and commissions, if you could share that with this committee, because there may be committee members who would like to listen in on those. And I think this is very much an iterative conversation where there's work that they're doing, but there's also opportunities for us to say, hey, have you looked at this? Or this is something we're particularly focused on and would help in our work or help to inform our work. So that's really helpful. Excellent. Once again, a fabulous conversation. So we'll put this on the agenda to continue those next steps, and then also to other the board members, and of course also to staff, if there's other ideas you have to address some of the conversation or those next steps, just please share it with Jesse and we'll be able to incorporate it through our next discussion. Well, thank you all so much. That was a really, really great conversation. On to legislative updates. Eric Hartstein, do you have a report out for us?
Sure do, thanks. So as you mentioned at the top of the meeting, it really has been an interesting legislative session. I'll speak to a couple of bills specific to this committee that include OWEB, and then I'll hand it over to Stephanie for a quick budget update. So OWEB is included in the Water and Climate Omnibus bills that passed out of the Ways and Means Committee earlier this week. So House Bill 2010 is the water package, and included in that bill is a source drinking water protection grant program for OWEB to administer that would provide grants to water suppliers to protect, restore, or enhance sources of drinking water. So the grants would be used to acquire land or enter into covenants, easements, other types of agreements, or to repay loans that were used to finance projects that protected, restored, or enhanced lands that benefited source drinking water. So the package includes an appropriation of $1 million of general fund for the grant program, but we're also watching for the end of session, or sometimes they're referred to as Christmas tree bills, that may be coming soon, as there could be additional funding through lottery bonds included for this program. The bill also includes funding for a position to oversee the grant program. And House Bill 3409 is the climate package, and included in that bill is the establishment of the Natural and Working Lands Fund, which OWEB would act as a fiscal agent for transferring funding to other, they're called climate solutions funds, as directed by the Oregon Global Warming Commission. And so in that Natural and Working Lands Fund, there's an appropriation of $10 million. And those other climate solutions funds that OWEB would be transferring funding to would be set up at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and here one at OWEB as well. So all those would be used to promote natural climate solutions and provide incentives for technical support to help landowners, tribes, and environmental justice communities adopt practices that support natural climate solutions. And this bill also includes funding for a fiscal analyst position, or a position for OWEB. This would be a fiscal analyst position to support the work that the agency is directed to do in the bill. So from Ways and Means, both bills would need to pass both the House and then the Senate before they are considered by the governor. So maybe I'll stop there and just pass it over to Stephanie for a quick budget update.
Great. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about where our budget bills are located before I talk about what's in for OWEB operations. So just a little background for the folks watching. Budget bills are like any other piece of legislation, and that they are heard in a committee, and then they must pass out of that committee and pass through both chambers before being considered by the governor. So our budget bills are Senate Bill 5539 and 5540, I think is the other one. And so those were heard in the relevant Ways and Means Subcommittee, which is the Subcommittee on Natural Resources. They had a public hearing, they had a work session in the subcommittee, and then this past Friday, they had a work session in the full Ways and Means Committee and passed unanimously. So the next step, since it's a Senate bill, or since they're Senate bills, are for them to go to the full Senate for consideration. They are scheduled for a second reading today. And so that's kind of where they're at, is they're waiting in the Senate to be able to pass there. Then they would go to the House to be considered by the governor. In terms of what is in OWEB's budget bill, I'll just go through a few details there. And Lisa and Eric and Jesse, please feel free to jump in and add anything you think I've missed. I think one really important and good piece of news is that OWEB didn't take any cuts in this budget. And that, given the shift in the grants operations split for lottery funding, that was a potential concern. So that is really, really good news. It continues our base budget. It adds to that foundational organizational structure of OWEB by funding one of our policy option packages to reclassify 2 manager positions and reclassify a staff position to a manager position. So it gets us part of the way toward the org structure that we believe is needed for operational effectiveness and to continue doing all of our core work and future additional work. One thing I wanted to make sure and highlight, because this is the Climate and Water Committee, is that we have a federally funded position for this biennium, thanks to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, to continue our water and climate work. In other words, to be able to continue Jesse's position. So we got the position authority in the budget that worked through Ways and Means last week, and we have the funding from NRCS, and we have a signed agreement. So just wanted to express appreciation for NRCS. NRCS is also continuing to fund a Tidegate coordinator position at OWEB. So that's another federally funded position in our budget. While I'm on the topic of federally funded positions, we also received position authority for a National Historic Preservation Act coordinator position to help make sure that Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Grant recipients are complying with those requirements. And we have some funding for another position to administer BLM Good Neighbor Authority grants, as well as NRCS technical assistance grants. So that's a little bit about the federal side. We got position authority for continuing some positions related to the Oregon Ag Heritage Program and the Water Acquisitions Grant Program. So neither of those reflect new investments in either the operations or the grant side, but we did get the authority to continue existing positions using existing funding to administer the grants that have been awarded, and in the case of water acquisitions, to administer grants that will be awarded. See here, another really important thing is that we got reallocation for general funds for fire and drought grants that have already, where the funds have already been committed to OWEB grantees, and the projects just weren't feasible to complete before the end of the biennium. So general funds are use it or lose it dollars. That was something that was very important for OWEB and our grantees. And so just want to express appreciation for the authority to continue positions to administer those, as well as have the grant funds, those general funds, continue to be available to the grantees. So those are some of the highlights. And again, our budget also recognizes that change in the split between grants and operations. Yeah, anybody else, Lisa or Eric or Jesse, anything else you'd like to add? All right.
I would just add, I mean, I think generally this is a really good budget for OWEB, and the fact that we took no cuts was excellent. The place that we continue to try and figure out how to balance is core work, because we didn't get positions that we lost in that 2020 timeframe, 2019, that were in the core work that we do. And so that still is something that we're working through with the exec team, looking at workload, looking at structure for how we continue that work, and what are the nice to do's, what are the have to do's, and sorting some of.
Excellent. Thanks so much for those comments. Any questions from board members? Thank you. Seeing none, let's move on to the next agenda item. It's an update on the climate resolution rulemaking process. And Eric or Jesse, do you want to lead this conversation?
Yeah, I could turn it over to Jesse. So the public comment period for the draft rules that we presented to the board in April closed on June 5th. And we received a total of 2 comments from the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts and the Nature Conservancy. We did not have anyone attend the virtual public hearing in May that wished to provide for verbal comments. So staff are in the finishing stages of reviewing the written comments that were submitted, and we're developing a document that summarizes the comments received as well as OAG's response to each of the comments. And we will be providing those response documents to those who submitted comments as well as to the board in advance of the July meeting. So at this time, we don't anticipate that there will be any real big substantive changes to the draft rules after the public comment has been reviewed. That you all saw presented to you in April, and which will be before you next month for adoption. So maybe I'll just, Jesse, if it's okay, I can do a screen share of the rules, or if you want to, that's great.
I beat you to it.
Okay, there you go. So actually, I'll pass the baton over to you if you wanted to talk through any of the definitions language or really anything else in this draft.
Yes, I think we just wanted to give the committee members an opportunity to see again what we have in here as the 3 rules that the RAC had recommended. So how engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change has informed or will inform the project, how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project, and how the project will contribute to durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, including human communities. And then the third is how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions or long-term carbon sequestration or storage has informed the project. And then we have a series of definitions, and what we did with the definitions, particularly for carbon sequestration and carbon storage, I mentioned that work of the Oregon Global Warming Commission Natural and Working Lands Advisory Committee. So we're trying to be as consistent as possible with language that's happening across the state enterprise and that other agencies and groups are involved in. But I did just want to mention and give a shout out to Bruce and other folks that were involved in the original climate work and the definitions and time that they spent thinking through some of these terms, and how we really tried to line up the definitions with content that was included in the climate resolution and that the committee had worked on in earlier versions. So you'll see that reflected, for example, in the local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. That draws on some existing state language, but it's also very much reflected in the climate resolution language that we have, as is the durable adaptation and resilience. So the committee spent, I think, quite a bit of time in the last 2 meetings talking through the definitions and what was going to be included in that. The Rules Advisory Committee, to be more specific. So we look forward to bringing it before the full board in July.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Questions from board members? Stephanie, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to make a comment about the public hearing. We debriefed a little bit afterwards, I think Jesse and Eric and I think that the level of engagement that they did prior to the public hearing is why we saw the attendance that we did. I think they worked really thoroughly to address concerns that came up in the RAC about, well, how will these rules be implemented? What will be the expectations? And I think they did such a thorough job of engagement that's why it was as quiet as it was. So I just wanted to offer that perspective.
Thank you for that comment. Appreciate that. And I'll say that I've been in those situations where you prep this whole large presentation and few to no one shows up, and it's always this feeling of let down, but there's many reasons. So I appreciate that. A couple thoughts I had when you were talking about it is, one, have we had any input or review from the DEI committee on this? because that was one of those components that we've been talking about. And I know that's separate from the public input process, and the public input process is closed, but internally within our organization, has the DEI committee had a chance to look at this and think about it and maybe add insights?
I can start, and then if Eric or Stephanie want to jump in, but I'll say that I don't know that what I just shared on the screen has been shared at the DEI and Environmental Justice committee level, but certainly this has been presented to the full board at different stages through its development. So they've had an opportunity to look at it. But I'm not always present on the DEI EJ committee meeting, so I don't know if it's something that's come up in more topics. I don't know, Bruce, if you remember that committee has spent any time talking about it, or Lisa or Stephanie.
And just to say, I think having their eyes on, especially those specific questions, may be helpful just to fully inform the board, because there may not, just to let them know that lens and that perspective would be helpful. That ties into that intersectionality piece. So whether they've looked at it, or whether, I don't know how full their agenda is, whether they've got another meeting coming up before our board meeting to be able to just look at it and have their members comment on it if possible. But Bruce, I jumped in, sorry. And then Lisa, it looks like you've got a comment as well.
Well, Jamie, there's been a fair amount of discussion at each of the DEI EJ meetings regarding climate and the resolution, not specifically the rulemaking. I think with the assumption that the rulemaking was the implementation arm of the resolution, and so specifically on rulemaking, no. On the resolution and what has been done by Water and Climate, yes.
Got it. Thank you. Lisa, do you have anything additional to add?
I think Bruce hit it. Because of all the engagement on the front side and taking things to the full board at the last meeting, we didn't slide this in as a specific agenda item, because it's been a continuation of the process. The full board will get to look at it again in July for comments.
Got it. Thank you. The reason why I raise that is sometimes looking at a topic or if we're in different modes and using different filters, we sometimes focus on different things. And just to make sure that we haven't missed that opportunity. So that was the basis for that question. And then also, just earlier in this conversation, we're talking about carbon sequestration, and the third point that you shared on that ties into that conversation. So I guess the question is, what does it look like going forward? I understand it's going to the board meeting, and the board will have a decision, but in terms of the ongoing conversations, this incorporates the carbon sequestration, this incorporates the DEI conversations about how do we continue to look at and think about things that have gone through rulemaking. So we have that overall direction presented to us, but just thoughts or comments, and I don't know if Jesse, Stephanie, Lisa, whoever might have a thought on what that looks like going forward. Stephanie, it looks like your hand's up.
I think a couple thoughts, and I'll let Jesse and Eric speak to this more specifically, but I think a lot of the work they've already done in terms of drafting some guidance for grantees is going to be a really important part of the implementation of the rulemaking. So they've already done a lot of that homework, but then another part is incorporating those questions into our grant applications, so they can speak to that in the time frame a little bit, and then providing training for grantees so they are used to the existing questions that we've included, but there will be new questions as a result of the rulemaking, and so providing training on how that works. So I think those are some important next steps that we'll continue to keep the board updated about as well.
Okay, Eric, just as you, before your comment, I was going to say this kind of has led us into our very next agenda item, which is discussing committee priorities and intersectionality between committees. And so in that vein, let's move into that. But Eric, go ahead, and then we'll see. I'll ask if there's any other bits we want to add to this intersectionality piece.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to reiterate what Stephanie just said about the trainings with our applicants and partners on ground. That'll be instrumental, as well as the reviewers. from our technical review teams, regional review teams across the state, because they're going to be seeing this too, and they're going to be having questions on how they will be applying these criteria to the restoration technical assistance, stakeholder engagement, monitoring grants, et cetera. So
Excellent.
it'll be really important, and we're looking forward to getting out there and doing those trainings.
Thank you. So on this agenda, this item of intersectionality, I know that not all the board members could attend this meeting. The chair of DEI was not able to attend this meeting, but in terms of the other committees, the DEI committee, the grants committee, do board members or staff have any comments or reflection or questions on whether or not we're having some of those tie-ins that we need to make sure that we're thinking about our work from multiple perspectives? Bruce.
Yes, thanks, Jamie. I'm not on the grants committee, so I can't address that, but I will tell this committee that the climate intersectionality with DEI has been a constant reference to the work being done by the DEI EJ committee. The recognition that the climate committee had early on that the climate crisis was also a social crisis. The recognition that climate and environmental justice are inseparable by this committee. The recognition that healthy watersheds would enable both nature and communities to thrive, and putting that into our resolution and throughout our resolution, I think is referenced on a regular basis at the DEI EJ committee. There's a lot of work being done there. The committee is going to have an in-person meeting prior to the full board meeting in Sisters in July. And I think that all the members of that committee are looking forward to it. So there's a clear intersectionality, clear communication with these two committees, and hopefully somebody on the grants committee can talk about that intersection.
And we don't need to, but this is the forum to do that. And we may not have all the folks who can weigh in at this point. So, but thank you for that, Bruce. I know there was so much intentionality that went into that resolution to tie both in together. So really appreciate that that's really carried through to the conversations. And with that, let's move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. Just as a quick reminder about our process, members of the public are welcome to weigh in person to join the meeting and to give a public comment on the work that OWEB is doing with regard to water and climate. Also welcome to submit written comments, and those need to be sent into Nicole Bettinardi, and I apologize by Nicole if I didn't pronounce your name well, and it's nicole.bettinardi@oweb.oregon.gov. And they need to be received the day before our meetings going forward. So and that's information is available on our website. So that's a reminder of our process. With that, I'll ask staff, are there any members of the public who have joined this meeting or wanted to join or comment on this meeting?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, we've had nobody sign up for verbal comment.
Thank you. And this is your chance also to correct my pronunciation of your last name.
Yeah, it's Bettinardi.
Bettinardi. There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. And we did receive one written comment, and I gave Jesse a heads up. Jesse, if you could please just comment on that and then share any information pertinent to that comment.
Jamie, I am happy to do that. Would you rather have Scott from Oregon Department of Forestry share his verbal comment first, or either way, you tell me?
Well, no, thank you for that. And Scott, did you want to share a comment? I know you joined our meeting, but please do if you want to.
Sure, I'd just like to express my gratitude for this committee's thoughtful and hardworking approach to climate and water issues, and really appreciate the discussion of intersectionality regarding environmental justice issues. Our agency, Oregon Department of Forestry, is working on very similar issues. And it's been about 5 months now since I last presented on the emerald ash borer, and just thought I'd take a quick moment to update you. The insects have now become active, and we are working with partners throughout Washington County to better understand the distribution of the emerald ash borer. And I'm encouraged to say it at this point looks better than we might have anticipated. And I've been very encouraged by the partnerships that have developed and the great communication and collaboration. So that gives me great hope. We know we won't eradicate the emerald ash borer, but it will improve our systems and do what we can. A quick update also regarding our agency's work. I just submitted a proposal to the U.S. Forest Service for $22 million for IRA funding that would have overlap considerably with the issues I heard discussed today related to climate and water quality. So we hope to hear by the end of fall how that pans out, but we'll be making slow and steady progress with or without that funding. And as was discussed earlier, the current legislative session has thrown us some curveballs, but we'll persevere as well and keep working on various fronts. So thank you all for your efforts. And if there are any areas that we can provide support, please count us in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was an outstanding presentation. Jesse, if it's not available as one of the listed presentations it's very informative. And so that was an excellent presentation you did. Thank you so much, Scott. And thanks for those comments and your great partnership with Oregon Department of Forestry. And thank you for that professional courtesy, Jesse. I stepped on my own toes there, but go ahead on the written comment.
Okay, we received one written comment from Blue Mountain Ranch, and the comment was fairly short and just talked about the lack of healthy functioning floodplains and how they're necessary to, healthy functioning floodplains are necessary to recharge our aquifers. But they did send a link to their website. So if you would like to take a look at it, it is www.blue.mountainmtnranch.com. And it has some fascinating stories around the history of the ranch and the family and their practices, talking a bit about the importance to them in terms of finding ways to slow water so that it can get stored within the system and not flushed out into the ocean. So that was our public comment.
Thank you so much. And it's a really great website. Moving on to our final agenda item, the good of the order and potential topics for our next meeting. And as you all are thinking about it, one of the things that the really excellent written comment prompted was this question of what is our process for getting public comments out from the committee level. So Lisa, I'll just flag that for you. Bruce and I were talking about what does that look like in terms of getting that access out? I know for the full board meeting that shows up on the website, but if you could please review that and consider as a recommended process for that, and then let us know what might work. I know you've done some great work around making sure public access, the public has greater access to our conversations, but just wanted to flag that for you for a future discussion.
I actually can respond to it. We have added the committee meeting public comments on the website with the meeting materials.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And as Jesse mentioned, it's a great website and a great comment. Thank you. And with that, other members, board members, comments and questions for next meeting. Bruce.
Yeah, I'd like to tee up a couple to see if the committee would like to address some in future meetings. Jesse, do you have that slide?
Yes, I do. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
one of the issues we've talked about at the resolution, prior to the resolution, was how do we keep track of what we're doing on climate? And about a year ago, this checklist idea was, I think staff received it. We sent it there as a possible inclusion to either application requests or applications or approved grants. The idea was not only do you use it to determine what climate benefits, co-benefits, et cetera, and what categories they're in, but also long-term being able to go back and keep a record and be able to do analysis on what we have done, how we have done on climate issues in our granting process. So this is just one idea that was sent out. And if the board would like to address how we might start getting information back long-term to build a portfolio of performance, then I can ask Jesse to send this out to everybody for their edits and comments, and we can bring it up. At some point then, intersectionality, we would address our request or our ideas to the grant committee and see what they would be interested in doing, and whether, and staff would have to determine how and if it could go into where it would go into our grant application or our grant process. So
Thank you, Bruce. And unless there are any objections from board members, let's go ahead and is that conversation, Bruce, is that about specifically this checklist, or is that broader, looking at how we collect data? It may tie into metrics as well.
Jamie, this is just a general idea for a type of checklist to say these are areas that 40% of our grant applications we're looking at address climate change impacts of drought, or they looked at co-benefits of DEI or recreation, whatever. But keeping a record and starting to build that performance portfolio, and I think it's important to see how well we're doing. The specific metrics this doesn't address. This is more of a general overview, and but if the committee would like to begin to talk about that on how we get information back in, then this might be a way to start.
Okay, thank you. And then Lisa, I see your hand just before I get to you. And I just wanted to kind of contextualize it. So it's my understanding from what you're saying, it's not necessarily only this specific example, but really the opportunity for the committee to talk about how we're getting some of that, how we're considering some of that information, and some of that will be staff sharing what is already done and maybe having that discussion. This looks like one example or opportunity. So that's Jesse to queue up for a agenda topic. Lisa.
I would just ask, based on some feedback from one of the other committee meetings, that we mark draft for discussion purposes on this, to make sure that it doesn't create confusion about what is, what isn't, or what's being considered. And then I also think it ties pretty neatly into some of the upcoming discussions around the agency strategic plan and thinking about how to capture performance. So there are several nexuses to what you're trying to do here that we need to think about, but trying to be more cognizant about that draft for discussion, because we don't want to cause anxiety when anxiety is not necessary for people.
Excellent comment, and a really great best practice for us all to keep in mind. But Lisa, to your point, exactly where I was trying to go with that framing of the stepping back, the larger picture, because this as a tool is a very powerful tool, whether this is in draft form or something, some version of this ultimately rolls out. But I do think it starts that larger, broader conversation, and that really ties into the why. And then this is a potential tool. I think having a tool is really valuable, but we can, start that conversation at the 35,000 foot level and then go down and look at maybe some other options as well. So that cues up, that's a great a great topic. Bruce, you had mentioned a couple. Do you have any other ideas?
Well, the second was and I'm looking for my notes here on and Jesse, please help me. I sent a presentation to Jesse a month or so ago regarding a contaminant that's been identified and affecting salmon health in watersheds. The work primarily has been done in Washington, but we're starting to see it more. And for the life of me, I'm trying to think of how to say it. It's 6-ppd quinone, but it's something that will end up coming. There's all likelihood that it will become more of an issue in Oregon. It has some environmental justice aspects to it as far as it's affecting tribal fisheries. And my question to Jessie when I sent it to her was what's going on. She's done a survey and maybe she can talk about it. And if the board or if this committee would like to know more about it, we can set it up as a agenda item for an upcoming meeting. So
And no need to respond, Jesse, just 'cause we're real tight on time, but just to say this as a topic, it sounds very similar to the Ashbrook presentation we just had. So we've got both information on pending threats, looking at them specifically and having presentations going forward, and then also these large process conversations or large, how do we gather information, or that kind of how we do our work piece. So unless there's any objections from board members, let's stick this also on our to-do list. And then our agenda is now getting pretty full. So what we can do is between now and our next committee meeting, unless there's priorities that board members want to speak to, Jesse, Bruce, and I, and Lisa, if you want to weigh in as well, or Stephanie, but we can figure out what agenda these items are placed on, and just look to discuss them in the next meeting or the next couple of meetings. Does that sound like a fair approach? Great. Any other committee members, any other items you'd like to see us think about? And again, in this context of either process, data collection, threats to our work, or the things that we protect through our work that you'd like us to include on the list. Oh, one other point, Jesse, what we could do actually is the end of our agendas. We can list some of the upcoming topics, even if we don't get to them that meeting, so that people know that they're queued up for future conversations. But any other requests for items to add or topics to address? Seeing and hearing none. And of course, you're always welcome to send something to Jesse, to Lisa, to Bruce or I, and we'll share it with Lisa and Jesse for future items to consider as part of adding to our agenda. That's of course board members. That's also members of the public for those considerations. So I've run a minute late. I was hoping to stay right on schedule, but we ran a little bit over. Thank you all so much. Thanks those of you for the public who've joined us. Thanks staff as always for a fabulous background work and preparation and all the work you're doing to prepare for these conversations. And to my fellow board members, thanks for your engagement, your involvement, and really the shared team commitment to this work. So thank you all and see you next time. One last comment. When's our next board meeting? Lisa, can you give us that date, or Nicole, you can jump in.
July 25th and 26th.
Thank you. For those who want to